Hi guys, welcome once again to this trade module of NPTEL, specifically on strategies of trade and protectionism, theories and empirics. We are now on our 5th week, first lecture, and this lecture number is 21st, where we are emphasizing a little bit away from the exact strategies to identify the kind of equilibrium we are dealing with. It is a pure theoretical approach, but still important for the understanding of international trade theories, because whatever we have dealt so far not necessarily right or might be capturing some part of our understanding. So, therefore, a holistic understanding of the mapping we are trying to derive is actually going to be good for understanding of trade theories in a better way. So, this week is meant for understanding equilibrium analysis of trade, though we have discussed many theories so far. So, the title of this lecture is therefore kept as partial equilibrium analysis of trade. I think we have read a bit on partial equilibrium analysis earlier in microeconomic theory, and microeconomic theory largely addresses the partial equilibrium aspects. So, myself Dr. Pratap Chandra Mohanty, presently a faculty member at the Department of Humanities and Social Science, IIT Roorkee. I am in the discipline of economics and already explained this module in many forum. So, therefore, I can add any kind of queries you raise to a better justified answer. So, therefore, guys, please keep on noting down all your doubts, all your issues in between. Whenever you have any queries, I will be very happy to address in our specific query section. There will be separate question answer session also will be added to each of the module, and at least week wise module, and in 1 week we are supposed to add it. So, let us go into the depth of equilibrium analysis and to explore bit by bit. So, try to also understand what are the structure, what exactly we are going to do it. So, since this is a complete structure and you may not be able to read it directly, let me help you out. So, here we are discussing analyzing international trade, finding out equilibrium relative commodity price. So, relative commodity prices, there are two approaches broadly. Here we are discussing two approaches. One is here, this side is partial equilibrium, this side is general equilibrium, and within partial what comes, within general what really comes. Within partial analysis, we are emphasizing demand and supply curves in both the markets stands for both the countries, and one market at a time. We are explaining one market and its price, equilibrium price and equilibrium trade price, which determine at point where exports of one nations are equal to the imports of other nation and vice versa. Where in the general equilibrium setup, we are taking the help of offer curve. It is one of the important instrument to measure the equilibrium price, to address the reciprocal demand, the demand of both the countries simultaneously. Now, we will address its properties, what is offer curve, how it is useful especially for general equilibrium analysis, and where we are addressing both markets at the same time, but whereas in the partial we address a single market at the same time. And so, therefore, the benefits is it is a complete analysis, but bit hypothetical, I must say from the beginning, largely hypothetical unless it is getting tested. And testing requires advanced softwares, we will discuss it. Quantity of exports and imports plotted against each relative prices, where we are discussing both the markets. It is a simplified approach, and the equilibrium price determines intersections of offer curves. Equilibrium price is determined through the intersection of offer curves of both the nations are touching both the markets. Okay. So, this is all about the capture, we are going to have it in this particular lecture. Now, as an anecdote to the understanding of equilibrium analysis, the context must be exploited or explored correctly. So, what is the context? Context is the relative commodity prices and their differences between the two nations in isolation reflect comparative advantage and therefore form the basis for mutual beneficial trade, which we have emphasized, which can use partial and general equilibrium setups and also determine relative price at which actually the trade take place between the countries. And the partial equilibrium analysis which we are implying here all about considering the effects of a given policy action in the market at a specific policy action in the market that are directly affected by the policy, and that is the analysis does not account for the economic interactions between the various markets in given economy. So, basically we talk about a single policy action and there we will emphasize that particular action so far as partial is concerned, whereas the general setups like the equilibrium setups of other directions, other interactions, other policies, various other markets economy are not captured in the partial equilibrium, whereas in the general equilibrium setup all markets are simultaneously modeled and actually considered for interaction for a better relative price determination. What is important here? What is important here is the following. Important because of determining relative prices, which is the basis for trade, and the relative price is also the basis for terms of trade. We will also explore the context of terms of trade in this lecture. SMART is the market access simulation package included in the WITS database. We have already discussed World Intellectual Trade Solutions by World Bank, and this is not freely available, this is a paid version, and this is called a partial equilibrium modeling tool, not a general even, but whereas a GTAP is another software, a package is generally used for understanding general equilibrium analysis. The other general equilibrium packages also can be explored from the different sources. Now, then what are the advantages of partial equilibrium modeling? Now, I think so far I have clarified why it is required, I mean why we are analyzing this and where we are specifically targeting a partial and general equilibrium analysis because of some advantages and disadvantages. So, we will attach our answer accordingly. Now, first of all, when we have partial equilibrium modeling and deliberately chosen because of it requires minimum data. On minimum data, but at least give certain suggestions for policy making and certain suggestions for better and systematic presentation. Now, the only required data for the trade flows and trade policy like tariffs and couple of behavioral parameters as well like elasticity, responses, responsiveness of exports and imports and trade flows from one country to another country. So, therefore, it is very essential. As I already said, WITS database contains all those things, therefore, the analysis gets easier. Analysis is a fairly disaggregated level. Another important advantage here at a very detailed level. Whereas in case of general, we are making it general, considering all the variables simultaneously, it gives certain specific directions, but not all. Whereas within the specific direction through disaggregated level or in the partial equilibrium setup, we get a core analysis of the problem. Like for example, it allows the study of the liberalization of brown rice particularly, whereas effects of brown rice cannot be captured individually in the general equilibrium analysis because it gets aggregate information maybe in the rice segment. Here we are saying brown rice particularly. This also resolves a number of aggregation biases. So, let us check what you mean by aggregation biases, how it gets captured in our partial equilibrium setup, whether partial equilibrium creates aggregation biases or not. to be understood carefully. In this one we said advantage of partial equilibrium modeling. Now, by the same logic we can now infer that general equilibrium allow the analysis of the likely impact of trade agreements, like specifically Doha round more accurately, which is largely discussed. Doha round is one of the round. We will actually talk about the countries unionism or multilateralism, regionalism, and going for trade blocks are separately dealt. We have dedicated sessions for it. We will unfold the discussion, but at this moment the specific impact of a particular round of trade negotiation can also be identified in partial equilibrium setup, since it is at the disaggregated level. In general, by the virtue of the simplicity, we try to mention that partial equilibrium models tend to be more transparent and generally very easy to implement. So, therefore, the modeling is quite straightforward and resulted in the explanation which are very easily explained. So, there are so many aspects: simplicity, transparent, easy to implement, easily explained, disaggregated level, and the single sentence. So many aspects are mentioned. Now, let us check how things are actually explained with a partial equilibrium setup, and that leads to some kind of aggregation bias. Aggregation, if we are just forcing ourselves to make an aggregate because of an aggregation result or because of general equilibrium result through the demand and supply diagram or discussion, I think the aggregation bias resulted. Let us for example, apple market and orange market. Let us, there are two fruits in the fruits market. Now, for our assumption to understand the aggregation bias of the partial equilibrium setup, let be the case that apple has a demand exhibited with inelastic nature, whereas oranges have fairly elastic demand market. Now, as we know, elasticity of demand in the microeconomic analysis, where if it is elastic, then the responsiveness of prices are actually different accordingly, whereas if it is inelastic, the prices are actually irresponsive to the demand change in the demand of apple. Now, based on this, when we have two separate market, we have vertical demand curve for apple, here it is explained by dA, and inelastic demand curve, relatively elastic demand curve. I mean, if it is elastic, then it is not a vertical. This is this is downward sloping demand curve for the orange market. Now, let us be the fact that there is a world market for it, and let us aggregate it. When we aggregate both the market together, it will be boiled down to as fruits market. One is called inelastic, another is fairly elastic. So, the combined will result in a downward sloping demand curve if we just combine it based on these two information. How to combine it then? I mean, we know the aggregate demand, how it gets calculated. So, since it is inelastic, this is relatively elastic, just the addition of these two will result in an elastic aggregate demand curve. Based on this limited information, we define this as fruit market, because we assume there are only two fruits in the market. Let be the case that world price is set after trade at PW, and accordingly different prices for the markets are set. Now, if there is tariff in the individual market, what it is going to happen? If tariff is there, now let me read it. If tariff is applied in the apple market only, not on the orange market. If tariff is implemented in the apple market, because it exhibited inelastic, completely inelastic demand, whereas the orange market is elastic, therefore, imposing tariff is generally not suggested, because if tariff is imposed in the orange market plus T attached with this one, if orange market is there, then it will de-incentivize the consumers to purchase oranges, whereas in case of apples, since it is fairly elastic, or it is infinitely elastic demand, completely elastic demand, higher taxes will not demotivate the buyers to purchase. Therefore, it is suggested to impose tariff on the apple market. Likewise, there are lots of example, penicillin drugs and insulin for the diabetic patient, where even if prices increases, they are not going to stop their consumption because it is too essential. Similarly, so tariff is imposed in one market. Okay. So, what it happens really when tariff increases, the consumption actually not demotivated in that market, but aggregate tariff, aggregate total rise in the price in the aggregate market by TF, so aggregate prices increases. So, that reduces certain extent of welfare in the fruit market. Now, to explain this correctly, let me read it. Apples face a tariff TA, but the demand for apples is perfectly elastic, consequently TA does not entail welfare cost. Now, look at from here, there is no change in the welfare cost since that much of demand is still intact, since it does not affect the level of imports. So, imports not reduced since it is inelastic. Where the orange market demand is somewhat elastic, the imports face no tariff, again there is no welfare cost, because no tariff is imposed on the orange market. So, the protection on the fruit market as a whole, if we just try to aggregate both the market, protection on the fruit market is clearly not associated with welfare cost, because here there is in the apple market there is no welfare cost, orange there is no taxes or tariff, there is no welfare cost. In the apple market there is no welfare reduction because it is completely elastic and the tariff is not demotivating their consumption. So, therefore, it is not reducing their welfare. But on the aggregate fruits market, due to tariff, it is now clearly visible that it reduced welfare. Unless implement that, the fruits market would conclude that there is a welfare cost explained by the blue stripes or the blue triangle because of the aggregation bias. Now, why it is called aggregation bias? Because now we conclude from this analysis that fruit markets attached with reduction in welfare after the implementation of tariff, which is this is contradicting because the tariff individual on the individual fruits does not attach any welfare loss, whereas due to aggregation of the fruit market, we have proved to the fact that there has been loss in the welfare, consumer loss. Why this is called consumption loss? Because this is on the demand. When price increases, our consumption falls. So, the willingness to pay, I mean demand curve captures the willingness to pay. So, now they are willing to pay less. So, the extent of utility already occupied with the low prices are actually not poised with the new choices. So, they are getting rid of the utility. So, therefore, so the fruit markets has net consumer loss, which is wrong to conclude. So, therefore, it is called aggregation bias due to partial equilibrium analysis once you are aggregating it. Then what are the disadvantages of partial equilibrium modeling? So, sentences are large. So, therefore, I need to emphasize it because there are many information hidden. So, partial equilibrium approach also has number of disadvantages that have to be kept in our mind while conducting an analysis. Since it is only partial model of the economy, the analysis is only done on a predetermined number of economic variables. This makes it very sensitive to few behavioral elasticities. So, I mean sensitivities of the elasticities are very important, behavioral elasticity is important to be taken down before aggregating. Due to the simplicity, partial equilibrium model may miss various important other variables which has large extent of interaction among the variables, basically feedbacks between various markets. So, in particular partial equilibrium approach tends to neglect the important intersectionality among the variables, especially upstream and downstream variables. So, that are by a basis of general equilibrium analysis. It also misses existing constraint that also apply to various factors of productions and their movement across the boundaries or across the sectors. So, these are also largely neglected in the partial equilibrium setups. Then let us understand the partial equilibrium pricing structure, the relative prices. We have already though taken off in one of our lecture earlier. That time I said that we will explain it categorically when we will unfold the discussion of partial equilibrium analysis. Now, in panel A, panel B we have panel C. Out of all these 3 panels, the middle panel stands for the world market or the international trade of the commodity X. Now, we are only looking at one commodity. So, because our approach here is sticking to the partial equilibrium setup. Now, here what is more important, because now we are looking at panel A nation 1's market for commodity X, panel C where we are emphasizing commodity X in nation 2's market. Now, let us assume and let us put our vertical axis in terms of relative prices of X as compared to the prices of Y in their domestic country. So, accordingly demand for X can be defined, or we can also take the relative demand of X as compared to Y, but since it is partial purely, let us stick to only partial equilibrium with X demand and supply. Within the domestic country, with certain assumption, let us the equilibrium sets at P1. So, domestic price stands at P1 relatively, I mean relative price of X is P1 as against Py, whereas in panel C especially for the another country, partner country, in their relative price stands at P3, and P1 we know it P1 is much lesser than that of P3 so far as the autarky situation is concerned. The autarky prices actually give a scope for trade, international trade. Now, the autarky situation define their relative prices. Now, based on that, now since this is different relatively, so there will be scope for trade. When there is trade, what really happens, from this we can easily infer that the relative price of X is low, therefore, the country A will specialize in the production of commodity X, and in return the other commodity may be imported from other country. So, commodity X is now produced and exported to commodity to another country, that is country 2. Now, after trade, now there is a possibility of trade. So, after trade what really happens, the demand for X is now rising because we are exporting, there is import demand from country 2. So, demand for X actually gets higher. When the demand for X gets higher, so the country 1 will be actually expecting higher prices for it. So, price is expected to be higher, certainly not reaching till that extent, but it will be on the mid, because of the fact that in country 2 simultaneous demand for since their relative prices of X production is very high, once they are getting imports from other country, now their supply is actually getting higher and higher, supply for X is getting higher and higher, When supply exceeds relatively higher, the prices for them actually reduces. When price falls, there are in one side there is a rise, in other side there is a fall. So, there must be an equilibrium price that settles both the countries need for setting a relative prices. So, let us assume that this is the place that is at B star equilibrium price settled, and the exact gap is the export in country X and import in country 2. Country 1 it is export and import. So, therefore, the exact distance this one equal to this one should equal to this one. So, there will be no imbalance and equilibrium settled. This type of analysis is called partial. Once again we are emphasizing because we are looking at one market at a go, only we are sticking to X, or we are sticking to X, or we are sticking to only one market, one country at a go. Now, these are the explanations I have already made. So, equilibrium relative commodity prices with trade and partial equilibrium setup. So, P2 is the equilibrium price commodity with trade, we have already said it, and so P2 this is the P2 we have derived. So, equilibrium prices are derived based on this approach. Now, let us move to our other segment in understanding how relative prices are determined. What are the other approaches suggested? One of the techniques for getting a price which is quite general in nature or called general equilibrium prices, because of the fact that we have all the sectors and their informations are shared together simultaneously. Now, the instrument is called offer curve. Offer curve is also called reciprocal demand curve. Reciprocal demand curve because whatever we export, we have a reciprocity of demand from another country, initially introduced by Marshall and Edgeworth and famously known as Edgeworth box diagram, we have read in microeconomic theory. And this shows how much of imports, offer curve shows how much of import commodity a nation demands for it to be willing to supply various amounts of its export commodity. What do you mean by that? While you are importing, usually that is called import demand. So, when you are importing, there must be a reciprocity attached to it. What do you mean by that? When we are importing, we have certain conditions attached, we have reciprocity to supply equivalent to the amounts we have imported. So, those are also expressed. So, there are reciprocity attached, therefore, there are general equilibrium solution is attached to it. So, these actually can be derived from production possibility frontier and indifference curve map, both if you are taken together instead of just one information of commodity X demand or Y demand individually through demand and supply, that only captures partial information, whereas if you include PPF as well as IC indifference curve map and also including various hypothetical relative commodity prices at which trade could take place, will actually cover a holistic approach of understanding relative prices. Now, here it is presented in detail with two diagrams. So, let us explore the nation 1 and nation 2. So, here it is nation 1 and its offer curve is discussed here. Now, how offer curve is derived? If you go back and check our week 2 or week 2 specific or lectures where we discussed with one example, where we said commodity X in country 1 has specialization and they produce the product relatively cheaper. Their transformation curve is relatively less steeper and it is relatively more with less slope, and the Px by Py is lesser in country or nation 1. Now, starting with point A, if you remember we said that and this even in this diagram the PPF is little tilted or biased towards commodity X. So, in the autarky situation starts with the notation A here, where we said that country has a very less relative prices. That means this is Px by Py is lesser than that of any other points down the line. Now, if there is trade, then what really going to happen? And trade takes place if and only if we have certain other contracts. Contracts means if the relative prices increases and offered by another country, Px if Px by Py is a new price, Px1 by Py is if it is greater than this, then country 1 will prefer to export x of this variety in lieu of importing this much of from another country. Since we are importing, we have higher choices and we get more benefits, our income again gets distributed. So, therefore, we land with a higher consumption function. So, we have a new equilibrium point f. If again the country gives let us be the case that the initial change is from 1/4, here we are saying 1/4 is the Px by Py. Now, due to trade that change to half, at the half we are offering like this. Now, ultimately there are possibility of equalization of prices, let it be only 1 Px by equal to 1. So, when it gets 1, we have even higher prices relatively of x. So, we will be agreeing to offer more at the cost of another one. So, the final equilibrium price stands at B. Now, look at this in a diagram. When the price ratio is 1/4, we are offering here 20 of x. When it is half, we are offering 40 because relative price increases. When it is even 1, we are offering this much, that is 60, and since it is price ratio Px by Py equal to 1. So, 60 is shared with 60. Okay. So, this much with this one equal with equal distance. See, if all the points are actually plotted, this is offer curve of nation 1. All right. Similarly, we can plot the offer curve of nation 2, which is just the reverse, because we start with from the autarky position A, then accordingly price curve gets steeper, gets it's more flatter, because initially it was steeper, it is where there we say 1:4, here we are saying 4:1, because terms of trade is just the reverse. Now, accordingly 4:1, then 1:half we said, now it is just the reverse 2:1, now 1, accordingly we have different plots. So, our offer curve looks like this for country 2. Now, we are including so many markets together and arrive into some kind of transaction. When we plot both the things together, offer curve of 1 and offer curve of 2, offer curve of 1, this is 2, this is 1. We arrive into one single equilibrium price, that is one price situation, and this settles both countries 60:60, and where is there is a price equilibrium situation. All other points are partial equilibrium and gives very limited information. So, therefore, offer curve is going to solve the country's trade and derive a single equilibrium price. So, the general equilibrium we are explaining here is actually explained with the help of offer curve. These are the explanations I have already discussed, no need to emphasize. Based on that, we can take off the demand and supply accordingly, but I think we can discuss and defer it to our another lecture when we take off the tariffs in detail. So, we will talk about in detail. Similarly, terms of trade can also discuss later on. We have already discussed partly, while I will take it forward to the next class. But I think I think you should go back and check offer curve, and discussion will be very fruitful. With this, let me thank you.